If you've never driven a loaded semi-truck through the Appalachian Mountains at night, there's no way to fully communicate what that experience is. The grades hit you before you can see them, the road drops away, and suddenly you're managing 80,000 pounds of momentum down a 6% decline with nothing but the painted lines and the guardrail between you and several hundred feet of mountain air. The fog comes up out of the hollows with no warning. 1 second clear, next second visibility down to 30 feet. The switchbacks in the older sections are tight enough that you're crossing the center line on every turn and hoping nothing is coming the other way in the dark. And the mountains themselves, the Appalachians on either side of those roads are old and dense and black at night in a way that no headlight reaches and no camera captures properly. There are sections of US 19, of US 25, of the old state routes through Virginia and West Virginia and Tennessee that run through country so remote that if something goes wrong, if your engine quits, or you drift onto the shoulder, or you stop for any reason, the nearest help is a long time coming. A lot of miles get driven through those mountains by people alone in a cab at 2 a.m. with nothing but the road and the radio and whatever is out there in the dark beyond the headlights. Tonight, I have 4 of their stories. 4 truckers, 4 stretches of Appalachian Road, 4 things that happen in those mountains that none of them have been able to put completely behind them. 2 hours. Get comfortable. Let's go. I have paper maps in my truck. I want to say that first, because some people hear GPS took me somewhere wrong and they think, well, just use a different map. I carry paper maps. I carry a road atlas. I carry state-specific supplements for the mountain states. I carry printed route sheets for every run I do regularly. What I'm about to tell you cannot be explained by a GPS glitch, because I found the town on the GPS, and I walked through it, and I talked to a man in it. And when I got home and tried to find it on 3 different paper maps and 2 satellite mapping platforms, it wasn't there. Not mislabeled, not named something different than what I thought, not in a slightly different location than I remembered, just not there. No roads, no intersection, no town, nothing. My name is Ray. I've been driving long haul for 16 years. I know the mountain routes the way some people know their neighborhood. I've run US 19 through West Virginia more times than I can count. I know where the grades are, where the fog collects, which pull-offs are actually wide enough for a loaded trailer, and which ones look wider than they are and will put your rear axle in a ditch. This was a run I'd done maybe 40 times, a delivery out of Charleston headed north. I was coming back empty, which means lighter, easier to handle, but also means you're not in a rush. And late at night, the temptation to log a few extra miles before you stop is stronger. It was a Tuesday in October 2 years ago. I'd left Charleston just after 10 p.m. Around 12:30 a.m., my GPS indicated a traffic incident on my planned route. A road closure, it said, accident with emergency vehicles, estimated delay 90 minutes. It offered a reroute. I accepted the reroute without looking at it carefully enough, which is the thing I've gone back to more times than anything else in this story. If I looked at the reroute before I accepted it, I'd have seen that the alternate roads it was sending me on were not on my atlas. I didn't look. I just followed the arrow. The reroute took me off US 19 onto a state route I knew. Then off that state route onto a county road I knew less well but had used before. And then onto a road that I realized within about 10 minutes I did not know at all. 2-lane, paved but narrow. The kind of paving that county budgets produce in mountain areas. Adequate, functional, clearly maintained, but not recently. The road climbs steadily into the mountains, tight curves, dense tree coverage on both sides, no painted center line after the first mile, no signage. That's what I noticed first. No road name signs, no distance markers, no indication of what this road was or where it was going. County roads in West Virginia have signage. They have green markers at intersections. Even the smallest ones have something. This had nothing. I followed the GPS. 23 minutes off the paved county road, which I tracked on my trip odometer because once the signage was gone, I was tracking everything. The road crested a ridge and began descending into a small valley. And at the bottom of that valley was a town, small, genuinely small, a cluster of buildings along what appeared to be a main street, maybe 2 blocks of commercial frontage and residential streets going back into the trees on both sides. The kind of small mountain town that dots the West Virginia Hollows, a hardware store, a church, a couple of older storefronts, but lit up at 1:07 a.m. I checked the clock. Several of the buildings were lit. A gas station on the right side of the road as I descended. Lights on, pump canopy illuminated. An open sign in the window of the small attached office. A diner across the street, the interior visible through plate glass, booth lighting on. I could see a man behind the counter. A handful of vehicles parked along the street, trucks, older model cars, the kind of vehicle population you see in working mountain communities, a town occupied, running. At 1:07 a.m., in a hollow I'd never been to before, on a road that had no signage. I pulled in to the gas station because I needed fuel and because I have a rule about running low in mountain terrain at night. You fuel when you can, not when you have to. The pumps were older models, functional but outdated. The kind that require you to go inside and prepay, which I did. The office was clean. A woman behind the counter who nodded at me and processed my card without conversation. Nothing unusual about the transaction itself. I fueled, went back inside to get my receipt, and while I was waiting, I looked out through the window at the diner across the street. A man had come out of the diner and was standing on the sidewalk, looking at my truck. Not aggressively, just looking, the way people in small towns look at trucks that aren't from the area. When I came out, he was still there. He said, "Where are you headed?" I said, "North," gave him the general destination. He nodded, said the road through the hollow connected back to the county road about 4 miles further on, that my GPS was probably right about the route. I said I hadn't seen this town on my maps. He said, "We don't get a lot of through traffic." I said, "What's the town called?" He looked at me for a moment. Then he said a name, and I want to be honest with you. I heard the name at the time, I processed it, but when I tried to recall it an hour later, I couldn't bring it back. Not because I wasn't paying attention, because the name simply would not stay in my memory, like trying to hold water in an open hand. I said, "How many people live here?" He said, "Enough." He said it pleasantly, without edge, just enough. I said, "Okay," thanked him, got back in my truck. He was still standing on the sidewalk when I pulled out. I watched him in my mirror until the road curved, and he was gone. The road connected back to the county route exactly where he'd said it would. 4 miles on, I picked up signage again at that junction, recognized where I was back on US 19. Within 15 minutes, I called my dispatcher Bobby from the cab, told her about the detour. She pulled my GPS tracking log for the run, confirmed my route, confirmed the time I'd spent off the main road, confirmed I'd been stationary for 11 minutes at what her system listed as approximate coordinates in the mountain region. She said, "What's at those coordinates?" I said, "A town." She said, "Huh, my map's not showing anything there." I said, "Neither is mine." She said, "Could be the data's just not updated." I said, "Maybe." She said, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, just wanted it logged." She logged it. The next day, home, I did what I said I'd do. Road Atlas, I traced the route from where I'd turned off the county road, followed the road on the map. The county road existed, turned into nothing. The detour road I'd driven for 23 minutes had no corresponding line on the paper. Satellite mapping platform. I went to the approximate coordinates Bobby had pulled from my GPS tracker, zoomed in on the valley. Dense tree coverage, no buildings, no road, no cleared land, no gas station, no diner, no main street, trees, just trees, filling the hollow, unbroken canopy, no sign that anything had ever been cleared or built there. I went back to Bobby's log, got the exact coordinates, put them into a second platform, same result, trees. I've driven that general area 4 times since, twice specifically looking for the turnoff, the county road junction where I'd left the marked route. I found the junction once, the 3rd time I looked, a break in the tree line that could be a road entrance, overgrown at the shoulder but with the compressed gravel surface of something that had been a road at some point. I didn't go in, I sat at the junction for maybe 5 minutes, engine running, looking at the break in the trees. Then I drove on. I'm not sure what I'd find if I drove 23 minutes down that road again. I'm not sure I'd find the valley, and I'm not sure I'd find the same town. And I'm not sure the man named Clell, who knew exactly where the road connected back, who looked at my truck on the street at 1:07 a.m. in a town that has no record of existing, would still be standing on that sidewalk. But I think he'd know someone was coming. I think he'd be watching for the headlights. I think some part of whatever that place is keeps track of who drives through it and knows when they might come back. Here's something most civilian drivers don't know about way stations. The procedure is standardized, not approximately standardized, not generally consistent, standardized. The way aviation procedure is standardized, the way medical protocol is standardized. When you pull into a way station, whether it's 2 p.m. in California or 2 a.m. in Virginia, the process follows the same sequence. You know exactly what to expect because you've done it hundreds of times, which means that when the process deviates, you notice, not something feels off noticing, procedural noticing, the specific recognition of someone who has done a thing correctly 500 times, looking at a variation and knowing immediately that the variation is wrong. That's what happened to me in that way station. And the longer the inspection went on, the more wrong the variations became, until I was standing on a mountain stretch of I-81 inches Virginia at 2:30 a.m. trying to figure out how to end an interaction that I was becoming increasingly certain I needed to end. My name is Mitch. I'm 41. I've been running the I-81 corridor through Virginia for 9 years. I know that stretch of mountain interstate the way I know my own driveway, the grades, the tunnels, the rest areas, the way stations, all of it. The way station in question sits in a mountain section, the Blue Ridge country. The specific part of I-81 where the road climbs for miles and the ridges close in, and at night the whole world narrows down to headlights and painted lines. I'd been through that station probably 60 times. 60. I knew the booth. I knew what the lights looked like when it was open. I knew what it looked like when it was dark and closed, and you drive past without stopping. On a Thursday night in September, the lights were on. I pulled in. I'll walk you through what normal looks like so you understand what wrong looked like. You pull onto the scale. The digital display gives you your weight reading. If everything is within legal limit, the officer waves you through or gives you a green light. If they want a full inspection, they signal you to a secondary area. You pull over. The officer approaches your cab, asks for your logbook and registration and bill of lading, does a visual inspection of the vehicle. And if everything is in order, you're back on the road in 15 to 20 minutes. That's the procedure. Every time. Every state, I pulled onto the scale. The digital display came up, and the officer, who I'll call Hale because that's the name on the badge I eventually saw, waved me to secondary inspection. Fine. This happens. Even when everything is right, they pull you in for a random. I pulled over, got my paperwork ready. Hale came to the driver's window. Here is where it started. He asked for my logbook. I gave him the logbook. He looked at it for about 30 seconds, and I watched him look at it. And here's the first wrong thing. He held it upside down. For those 30 seconds, the logbook was in his hands, upside down. Not the whole time. He flipped it around after a few seconds. But in the first moment of looking at a document he'd presumably looked at thousands of times, he oriented it wrong. I noted it, filed it, said nothing. He asked for my registration. I gave it. He looked at that correctly. He asked for my bill of lading. I gave him the bill of lading. He said, "And your secondary manifest?" I said, "My what?" He said, "The secondary manifest for the weight declaration." I said, "There's no secondary manifest. The bill of lading has the weight declaration." He said, "I need the secondary manifest." I said, "Sir, there's no such document. The bill of lading covers weight declaration." He looked at me for a moment, then he said, "Okay, go ahead," and moved on. No push, no argument, no procedure for pursuing a document he just said he needed. Okay, go ahead. He walked around the truck, which is standard, checking lights, tires, the connection between the cab and the trailer. I watched him in my mirrors the way you watch an inspector. Normal, nothing unusual about the physical inspection itself. He came back to my window. He said, "I need you to get out of the cab." Standard. They sometimes ask you to step out for a cab inspection. I got out. He said, "Stand over there." He pointed to a spot about 20 feet from my truck toward the building, away from the road. I walked to the spot. And then he said something I have never had a way station officer say to me in 9 years and 60 plus inspections of that specific station. He said, "Turn around and face the building." I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Face the building," while I checked the cab. I said, I've never been asked to. He said, "Standard procedure, face the building." And I want to be honest about what I did in that moment and why, because the why is the important part. I did not turn and face the building. I stood where I was and I looked at him and I said, "I don't believe that's standard procedure. I'm going to stay where I am." He looked at me, not threateningly, not aggressively, just looked at me with an expression I cannot describe any better than processing. Like my response was an input. He was running through something. Then he said, "Okay, that's fine," and opened my passenger door and looked into the cab for about 45 seconds. He came back around. He said, "Everything looks good. You're cleared to go." He handed me my logbook and registration. I said, "Can I get your officer number for my records?" He reached to the badge on his chest and looked at it, the way someone looks at a name tag they've forgotten they're wearing. He said the number. I wrote it down. I got back in the truck. I pulled out of the secondary area and back onto I-81, and I drove for 20 minutes at a speed that was slightly faster than I usually run before I called my dispatcher, Lorraine, on the satellite phone. Lorraine has been dispatching long-haul drivers for 15 years. She knows the regulatory world backward and forward. I told her what had happened. All of it. The upside-down logbook, the secondary manifest, the request to face the building. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What was the officer's badge number?" I gave it to her. She said, "Give me a few minutes." She called me back 18 minutes later. She said, "Mitch, that way station was closed on Thursday night." I said, "The lights were on." She said, "It closes at midnight on weekdays. It's staffed 6 a.m. to midnight, Monday through Friday." I said, "Lorraine, I was in secondary inspection at 2:17 a.m. She said, "I know what time it was." I said, "The lights were on." She said, "I know." Long pause. She said, "The badge number you gave me doesn't match any active officer in the Virginia DOT system. I've gone back over that inspection many times in the 2 years since. The sequence of it, what was wrong, what I didn't catch until later, the secondary manifest that doesn't exist, an inspector who held a logbook upside down, an instruction to turn away from my own truck while a stranger accessed it, a badge number that doesn't exist in any state system, a station that was officially closed. I've thought about what would have happened if I'd turned around and faced the building, if I'd put my back to my truck and my cab and whatever was checking it for 45 seconds. What would have been different when I got back in? What might have come with me? I filed a report with the state police. I filed a report with the DOT. Both investigations came back with nothing, no evidence of unauthorized use of the facility, no explanation for the lights being on after closure. The dash cam footage from my truck, which I pulled immediately when I got to the next stop, showed me pulling into the way station, showed the lights, showed the booth. The secondary inspection area is out of the dash cam's field of view. Whatever happened in that secondary area on that mountain stretch of I-81 at 2:17 a.m. in a station that was officially closed is between me and Hale and whatever Hale actually was. I run I-81 4 times a week. I have not pulled into that station again, and I never will. Real quick before story 3, we're an hour in, 2 more stories to go, and if the way station got to you the way it gets to me every time I think about it, story 3 is the one that made me check my mirrors driving home that night. Hit subscribe right now. This is what we do here every week. And drop a comment telling me what you would have done in that way station when he said face the building, because I think about that a lot. Story 3 is about a CB radio conversation between truckers who could see something behind a truck that the driver couldn't. Let's go. I've been on the CB for 20 years, and I want to explain what the CB actually is before I tell you this, because a lot of younger people think of it as a retro novelty thing from old trucker movies that nobody actually uses anymore. People use it. Truckers use it every day on mountain runs specifically, because mountain roads have dead zones where your cell signal is gone and your satellite communicator has lag. And when you need to know what's around the next curve or over the next ridge in the next 30 seconds, the CB is what you use. Another driver coming the opposite direction who just crested the grade you're climbing tells you what's there faster than any app. I listen to the CB on mountain runs the way I listen to weather radio, as ambient information, as a channel that might have something useful at any moment. What came through on a particular channel on a particular November night 3 years ago on a stretch of US 19 through the West Virginia mountains was useful in a way I am still processing. My name is Alphonse. Most people call me Big Al. I'm 46. I've been running mountain routes since I was 22. The run was a regular one, a load out of Beckley headed northwest. I'd done this specific route probably 200 times. I knew every grade, every curve, every place where the fog rolls in off the river bottoms in a way that cuts your visibility to 20 feet with no warning. I was maybe 40 miles into the mountain section. Good pace, good visibility for a November night, no traffic to speak of in either direction. Around 1:30 a.m. I picked up a conversation on channel 19. Two drivers, eastbound, coming the other direction. They'd have been maybe 20 or 30 miles ahead of me on the road, which would put them somewhere in the section I'd already come through. Normal so far. I hear conversations between eastbound drivers all the time when I'm going west. I wasn't paying close attention until I heard one of them say something that made me reach for the volume. He said, "That big Peterbilt about 4 miles back still reading you." The other one said, "Got him on the cam, still back there. I drive a Peterbilt." I'd been the only westbound truck on that stretch for the better part of 40 minutes. 4 miles back in the direction I'd come from would put them roughly at my position at the time they were going east. I picked up the mic and said, the Peterbilt you're talking about, westbound on 19? The first voice, who I'll call Tucker because that's the name he eventually gave, said, "That's you, Big Pete, running about 48? I said, "That's me. What are you seeing?" Tucker said, "You got something on your back end." I said, "What do you mean my back end? Like a mechanical problem?" Tucker said, "No, behind the trailer, on the road behind you." And the second voice, who I'll call Graves, said, "I got it on cam too." What is that? Not a question, a statement. What is that? I want to describe what you can and can't see from a truck cab in terms of what's behind you. Your mirrors show you both sides of the trailer. In good visibility, you can see a reasonable distance back, but directly behind your trailer, in the lane behind you, centered, you have limited visibility. Your mirrors are angled for the sides. The direct rear center line is what your dash cam covers if it's forward facing, which is the camera on the back of your trailer. I have a rear facing trailer cam, standard equipment. The monitor for it sits on my dash. I reached forward and switched the monitor on. The rear cam showed the road behind my trailer. Westbound US 19 mountain section, the pavement lit by my running lights for maybe 150 feet back, and beyond that, the dark curve of the road disappearing around the mountain. The road behind me, for 150 feet in every direction my camera reached, was empty. I said, "Tucker, I'm looking at my rear cam right now. I'm not seeing anything behind me." Tucker said, "How far back does your cam reach?" I said, "About 150 feet in good conditions." Tucker said, "It's further back than that right now, maybe 200. Hard to say exactly." Graves said, "It's moving." I held the mic for a second. Then I said, "Can you describe what you're seeing?" Tucker said, "On the cam, it looks like a shape on the road behind your trailer, moving at roughly your speed." I said, "An animal?" Tucker said, "I don't think so." Graves said, "I don't think so either." I said, "What shape?" Tucker was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Upright." Graves said, "Tall." Tucker said, "Moving on the road. Not in the trees, on the road." I said, "How far back did you say?" Tucker said, "It was 200 when you came past us. You've gone maybe half a mile since then, give or take." Graves said, "It's still there on my cam." Now, I want to tell you what I was doing while this conversation was happening, because the physical reality of driving a loaded truck through a mountain section at 1:30 a.m. doesn't stop while you're processing information on the CB. I was managing the road. I was watching my speed on the downgrade. I was watching the center line. I was doing everything a driver does on that section automatically, while the part of my brain that wasn't occupied with the road was trying to figure out what Tucker and Graves were seeing on their cameras that I couldn't see on mine. I said, has it gotten closer or further since you first saw it? Tucker said, closer. I said, how much closer? Tucker said, when you first came past us, it was maybe a quarter mile back. It's been closing since then. I said, it's running faster than me. Tucker said, looks like it. Graves said, I don't know how to describe this. It's not running like an animal. It's not moving like a person either. It's just moving. I did something at that point that I want to be honest about. I pushed my speed up. I'm not going to tell you a specific number because I don't need to put that in writing, but I pushed the speed up meaningfully, more than I should have on that grade, more than was fully safe with the load I was carrying. I said, tell me if it keeps pace. Tucker said, give me a few seconds of nothing on the channel. Then Tucker said, it's keeping up. Graves said, still there. I said, describe the shape again. Tucker said, tall, moving upright, arms, I think, or what looked like arms. Hard to get detail on a cam at this resolution and this light. Graves said, it's looking at your truck. I said, what? Graves said, the shape, the way it's moving. It's not looking at the road, it's looking at your truck. I'll be honest with you, there's only one reason I didn't completely lose it in that cab at that moment, and it's that losing it on a mountain grade in a loaded truck at speed will kill you much more, certainly, than anything behind you on the road. The road kept me focused. The road kept me breathing. I held the wheel and I kept my speed, and I said to Tucker, how far back now? Tucker said it was closing. Now it seems like it's holding steady. I said, holding at what distance? Tucker said, maybe 100 feet behind the back of your trailer. 100 feet. My rear cam reached 150. I looked at the monitor. The road behind my trailer was empty. For 150 feet, nothing. Whatever Tucker and Graves were seeing on their cameras at 100 feet behind my trailer was somehow not appearing on mine. I was on that mountain section for another 22 miles before I hit the valley floor, and the road widened and I could see the lights of a small city ahead of me. Tucker and Graves stayed on channel for most of it, giving me updates at intervals. It held at roughly 100 feet for the first 10 miles. Around mile 14, Tucker said it was dropping back. Around mile 18, Graves said he couldn't see it on his cam anymore. Around mile 20, Tucker said, I think you're clear. I said, what happened to it? Tucker said, I don't know. It just stopped following. Graves said, or it stopped where it wanted to stop. Nobody said anything on channel for a moment after that. Then Tucker said, you run this road often? I said, couple times a week. Tucker said, you might want to think about running something different for a while. I said, yeah. He said, I'm serious. I said, I know. I met Tucker in person 6 weeks later. We crossed paths at a truck stop in Charleston. I recognized his rig from the conversation. We sat and talked for an hour over coffee. He'd pulled his cam footage from that night. He showed me the stills on his phone. Dark, grainy. The resolution of a truck-mounted camera in nighttime mountain conditions. I looked at them for a long time. I'm not going to describe exactly what I saw in those stills, partly because the quality was poor enough that I genuinely couldn't be certain of the specific detail, and partly because the detail I thought I could make out is the kind of thing I don't want to put specific language to. What I will say is this. Whatever was on that road behind my trailer for 20 miles of West Virginia mountain highway at 1:30 a.m., it was looking at my truck, just like Graves said. And the reason I know it was looking at my truck specifically is because in the clearest still Tucker had, the one where the shape was most distinct, it wasn't looking at the road ahead of it. It was looking up at cab height, at the approximate location of where I was sitting. I run different routes now. Tucker was right about that. I need to start with the logbook, because the logbook is the thing that makes this impossible to dismiss as just a weird nap. A trucking logbook is a legal document. Every hour of your day is accounted for. Driving time, on-duty time, off-duty time, sleep or birth time, all of it recorded in 15-minute increments. Falsifying a logbook is a federal violation, the kind that ends your career and possibly your freedom. You don't mess with the logbook. Mine showed that I was in the rest area from 1:52 a.m. to 5:31 a.m., 3 hours and 39 minutes. I remember pulling in at 1:52. I remember waking up. I have no memory of anything in between, which is normal. I was asleep. What is not normal is that when I woke up, the rest area was wrong. My fuel gauge was wrong. And 3 hours and 39 minutes of off-duty time that I had no reason to take had appeared in my logbook in my own handwriting. I don't write in my logbook in my sleep. My name is Dolores. I'm 39. I've been driving for 13 years. I run the I-77 corridor through the West Virginia and Virginia mountains regularly. I know the mountain rest areas the way I know my own bathroom. The rest area where this happened sits at a gap in the ridge, one of those high elevation rest stops that look like they're hanging over the valley. The kind where in daylight you can see 50 miles in two directions, and at night you can see the distant lights of towns far below the ridge. I pulled in at 1:52 a.m., which I know because I logged it immediately. That's habit. Every stop gets logged as you pull in, not after. 4 vehicles in the rest area when I arrived, 2 other semis parked in the truck section, 1 passenger van in the car section, and a pickup truck at the far end. Normal traffic for a mountain rest area at that hour. I had 6 hours left on my available driving time. I didn't need the break, but I had a headache building, and I know from experience that driving through a headache on a mountain grade is a decision you sometimes don't recover from. I reclined the seat, set an alarm for 3:30 a.m., 90 minutes, closed my eyes. I opened my eyes. The rest area was quiet, which it had been when I arrived. Daylight, the specific pre-dawn gray that comes maybe 30 minutes before the sun, the ridge visible against a lightning sky. I looked at the clock, 5:31 a.m. I had set an alarm for 3:30. I looked at my phone. The alarm had been dismissed, not snoozed, dismissed, which requires pressing a specific button, a deliberate action. The 2 other semis that had been in the truck section when I arrived were gone. The van was gone. The pickup was gone. The rest area was empty except for my truck. I sat up and looked around. Not alarmed yet, just noting. I looked at my logbook. The entry I'd made at 1:52 was there. Arrival at the rest area off duty. Below it, in the next block, was an entry I did not remember making. The same handwriting as every other entry in the book. My handwriting, precise and consistent, the way you develop after 13 years of filling in the same form every day. The entry logged me as departing the rest area at 3:47 a.m. and returning at 3:51 a.m. 4 minutes. I had apparently, according to my own logbook, gotten up at 3:47 a.m., left the rest area for 4 minutes and come back. I have no memory of this. None. Not waking up, not opening the cab door, not going anywhere, not coming back, not re-entering the off-duty block. 4 minutes, 3:47 to 3:51, in my logbook, in my handwriting, gone from my memory. I got out of the truck. The morning was cold, mountain cold, at pre-dawn. I walked around the truck looking for anything that would tell me what had happened to those 4 minutes. The cab was locked from inside when I woke. I used the driver's side lock when I nap. I had to unlock it to get out. So either I went somewhere, came back, relocked from inside, or I never left. But the logbook said I left. I checked the fuel gauge, empty. Not low, not nearly empty. The gauge needle sitting on the E with the low fuel warning light on. I had fueled in Beckley 80 miles back, topped off to full before the mountain section. Standard practice, I always start the mountain grades on a full tank. An 80-mile mountain run, engine running, no idling beyond the 90-minute nap period. Should have used a specific and predictable amount of fuel, nowhere near empty. The gauge was on E. I called my dispatcher, a man named Phil who covered the overnight desk, told him I had a fuel emergency at the mountain rest area. Phil arranged for a fuel truck to meet me, which took about 40 minutes. While I waited, I sat in my cab and tried to reconstruct 347 to 351. Nothing came. Not a fragment, not a texture, not even the false memory of something that might have been a dream. Just a clean gap between setting my alarm at 1:55 and waking at 5:31 with nothing retrievable in between, 3 hours and 39 minutes, of which 4 were apparently spent doing something I drove to and came back from in 4 minutes in a mountain rest area at 3:47 a.m. The fuel truck arrived. A mechanic named Doug, who serviced that corridor, filled my tank and ran a check on my fuel system, looking for a leak or a line failure that might explain the gauge reading. Nothing wrong with the fuel system. He said, "You sure you filled up in Beckley?" I said, "I have the receipt." I showed him the receipt, time-stamped, full tank, 80 miles back. He looked at my fuel log, looked at the receipt, looked at the gauge. He said, "This doesn't add up." I said, "I know." He said, "You get any weird smells in the cab? Fumes?" I said, "No." He said, "If sometimes at these elevations, if there's a pressure differential in the tank." He went through 3 more technical explanations. I listened to all of them. None of them accounted for the gap between a full tank in Beckley and an empty gauge at the ridge. He shook his head, said to get it checked at the next yard, signed my service log, drove away. I sat in the cab for a while after he left. The sun was coming up. The ridge was turning gold. In daylight, the rest area looked exactly like it always looked. Picnic tables, parking marked for trucks and cars, the brick bathroom building, the view over the valley to the east. Nothing wrong with it in daylight. I tried to think about what could be in those 4 minutes. What could I have driven to in under 2 minutes from this rest area, done something, and driven back in under 2 minutes? In the mountains, in the dark, at 3:47 a.m., there is no destination within 4 minutes of that rest area. There's nothing on the road in either direction for miles. 4 minutes is not enough time to get anywhere and come back, and yet the logbook says I left. I've talked to 3 other drivers since who run that corridor, looking for anyone who'd had anything similar at that rest area, not asking leading questions, just describing the fuel issue and the time gap and watching how they responded. One of them didn't say much, just looked at his coffee. One of them said he'd heard things about that stretch of ridge, that there were drivers who'd had gaps up there, lost time, things they couldn't account for, that he'd heard it enough times from enough people to have a personal policy of not stopping it at that particular rest area. The third one, a driver named Barb who'd run that corridor for 20 years, said to me very directly, "You were there on the ridge, in the gap, in the dark, in October. You stopped." I said, "I know." She said, "Don't stop there again." I said, "What's in the gap?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's been there a long time, and it doesn't take much, just enough to get curious about you." She said, 4 minutes is enough." She said it quietly, matter-of-factly, the way a person states something they've thought about and arrived at and decided to accept as true. 4 minutes is enough. I don't know what happened in those 4 minutes. I don't know where my logbook says I went or what I did when I got there. I don't know what happened to 80 miles worth of fuel on a sealed system with no leak. And I don't know what dismissed my 3:30 alarm, what hand pressed the button with the deliberateness that dismissing rather than snoozing requires. While I was unconscious in a reclined seat in a locked cab on a mountain ridge in West Virginia at 3:47 inches the morning. I don't stop at that rest area anymore. I stop 10 miles before it or 15 miles past it, but never at the gap, never on the ridge. And Barb was right about one thing that I've come back to over and over in the year and a half since. Whatever is in that gap, it's been there a long time. Long enough to know that truckers stop at rest areas. Long enough to know that 4 minutes is enough. Long enough to know exactly how to use them. 4 stories, a town at the end of a road that isn't on any map, a way station that was closed but running, a shape on a mountain road that 2 truckers could see on their cameras but the driver couldn't see on his own, and 3 hours and 39 minutes in a mountain rest area with 4 of them unaccounted for. Here's what I keep thinking about when I think about truckers in the Appalachians specifically. Those roads have been there a very long time. US 19. The old state routes through the West Virginia hollows the mountain sections of I-77, I-81. Some of those mountain corridors follow paths that were trade routes before Europeans arrived. Cherokee pathways, deer trails before that, ways through the mountains that have been traveled for longer than anyone can document. The trucks came later. The trucks came much later. And whatever has been in those mountains since before the roads were paved, since before the guardrails went in, since before anyone put a painted center line down and called it a route, it's still there. It watches the trucks the way it watched everything else that moved through those mountains before the trucks existed. From the tree line, from the road behind the trailer, from the hollow at the end of the detour, from whatever is in the gap on the ridge at 3:47 inches the morning. It's patient. It's been patient for a very long time. And the night shift on those mountain roads is longer than any logbook records. Drive safe. Keep your fuel topped off. And if your GPS sends you somewhere that isn't on your atlas, look at the screen before you accept the route. Good night.